recording, so you can watch it later if you want, or in case somebody misses the session. Yeah, so basically, at the end of this, you should be able to document a safe system assessment. Should be able to do the scoring, and then we will send you out to do a mock safe system assessment on a real site near your house or your office or whatever address you gave us. So let's get some slides up and running. But of course, welcome your questions at any point. Okay. Right. So this session, I will point you at the guidelines for safe system assessments in different spots, which you may want to refer to. And I'll point you at some other resources as well. I'm going to show you how to complete a safe system assessment matrix, and that's the meat of a safe system assessment. And I've sort of alluded to it quite a few times or briefly mentioned it, but we'll go through in detail how to fill that out. How to write a safe system assessment report. And then one we haven't spent too much time on or any time on is to be able to categorize treatments into primary or supporting treatments. So we did a good job there early on of really establishing uniformity in how we think about the safe system and unpacking sort of New Zealand's safe system diagram and the approach and the principles of the safe system. And they're very relevant to actually doing a safe system assessment and I mean, underpin the whole process. But sort of that design for human vulnerability is central to the scoring in a sense, where we look squarely at severity of crashes, and also in that we promote good choices but plan for mistakes. And the others are all integrated and weaved in there in one way or another. But we're not going to revisit all of that. We did a wonderful job there of really understanding exposure, likelihood, and severity. And well done to everybody who's done their assignment. And you, unless you very recently put it in there, you will have got your mark and your feedback. And as I mentioned last session, I suppose the overarching thing was that was causing people a little bit of an issue was that exposure. And you will see shortly how the actual safe system assessment framework matrix should clear a little bit of confusion up. And I think you're all going to be placed pretty well to be able to do your safe system assessment. We talked a lot about the severity of crashes and the biomechanics of injury at different crash types. We used these curves. We drew this sort of general line at that around that 10% at the 30, 50, 70, 30 for pedestrian crashes with pedestrians and cyclists, 50 for that right angle passenger vehicle crash, 70 for that head-on style crash, and then provided you with a little bit more guidance and with this colored chart. And you'll be using these numbers, the 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 in your safe system assessment shortly. So you'll probably be hopefully going back to this to gauge a little bit of calibration in your scoring. And there's more, this is all out of module 1. We even added some more bits and pieces. We had this table, so adding some angles to crashes. We had a brief chat about side impact with poles, especially around the ANCAP safety rating thresholds and the like, with some fairly low speeds there. Yeah, so we'll just pop that, all of this sort of stuff into the front of this module, just so you've got it again, because it's very important that you're starting to refer back to that. Of course, keep your questions coming in as we tick along here, but I'm going to jump into how to do that safe system assessment. So this is the document. It's the Safe System Assessment Framework. It's an Austrade document. Late 2016 it came out. It's project managed by a New Zealander, Colin Brodie, for those who know Colin. I was on a working group as part of it, and I wasn't one of the authors of it, but certainly had my say at a few different points. And essentially that's where we've all got our guidance on safe system assessment. It has evolved a bit since then, in terms of a lot of people have been using it, a lot of jurisdictions are using it, a lot of people are finding some practical challenges with it. I mean, it'd never really been done when this document was produced. We did things called safe system audits before that, and they based a lot of, or a bit of this on our original safe system audits, but they but it's sort of different to that, and it was changed to safe system assessment, to not be confused with a road safety audit. But anyway, I'll go through that in detail. But the first thing to know is that there is scalability in the safe system assessment framework, in terms of the depth you can undertake the assessment. So you can do a very deep dive into a infrastructure project or the like, or you can do it at a more shallow level, and just a quicker exercise to gauge a bit of a feel for how well it aligns with safe system principles. There's also that scalability in terms of the size. It could be done on something very small, like a splitter island or a refuge island or something like that, the installation of a new refuge island. Or it could be done on a whole infrastructure program, or it could be done on a multimodal transport hub. It could be done on a remote community, a mining site. Yeah, there's quite a bit of scale that you can do. It does talk in there about getting the context of the project or whatever you're assessing, and gathering that information. I'll talk through that shortly. That's predominantly around being able to then feed into your treatments, a little bit into how you go about storing things. Then there's the safe system assessment matrix, and that's what I'm going to spend most of the session on, and that's it's one of the most critical things you get your head around. And then there's recommendations or treatments, or that you suggest alterations to a project. So the only two jurisdictions that have their own specific guidance are Victoria and South Australia. I've provided you those in your memory stick and on Moodle, just in case you want to have a look at a few different bits and pieces there. They just take a few of the specific bits of the Austrade Safe System Assessment Framework that didn't quite work too nicely, and clarified or adjusted, almost like supplements to Austrade's guides and those. So they're in there. They're essentially the same document, with some very minor tweaks. So the first thing, as I mentioned, that you do in a safe system assessment when you're doing a safe system assessment is understand the context of the project and gather your information. So the Austrade's guide provides these prompt questions, and they tend to form the sort of early sections of a safe system assessment report, where you'll have documented some of this information. Now, I tend to, if I've been asked to do a safe system assessment, or the team, we would tend to send this as a Word document back to the project team and say, oh, can you fill out as much of this as you can, or provide us documents that has this sort of information in it. So then we might do a opening workshop or meeting or the like. So talking about what's the traffic volume, what are the access arrangements, future growth patterns, amenity, maintenance renewal, what's the function of the road? So what's the one network categorization, movement in place categorization? Are there any commitments, political commitments or the like that you've made that you're going to just absolutely have to stick to, like duplication or speed limits or intersection form or these sorts of things? What are the current speed limits, and what's the land use? What are the road users present? What are the trip generators, pedestrian desire lines, heavy vehicles, motorcycles, all these sorts of questions. And they just, it's gathering a good picture for this assessment you're about to jump into. And then you start getting into your assessment matrix. Now, this is where we start to score a project in its alignment with safe system principles or a design. You always start by scoring the existing conditions. So assume they've given you a design to do a safe system assessment on. You always score the existing conditions first. Then, after you've done that, you score their design. But I'll get into that a little bit more later. But let's have a look at the matrix here. This is the matrix, the table, and it has 3 rows: exposure, likelihood, and severity. So there you go. You can see why I've been hanging on about those. They're central to the assessment matrix. The columns are run-off road, so they're crash types. Run-off road, head-on, intersection crashes, pedestrian crashes, cyclist crashes, and motorcyclist crashes. And then there's this other column. Now that is there to pick up anything that you don't believe has been adequately covered in the other columns, the other crash types. So it could be things like sideswipe crashes, crashes with animals, could be rear end mid-block crashes. So if it's a rear end based off queuing off an intersection, we categorize that as an intersection crash. But if it's a rear end based off a mid-block school crossing or a pedestrian operated signal or something like that, mid-block, then you'd have to categorize it in its own other treatment or other crash type. Now, they are essentially about the crash type. And what do I mean by that? Well, if a pedestrian is crossing the road at an intersection and is struck by a vehicle, the crash has occurred at the intersection, but we account for it in the safe system assessment in the pedestrian crash category. The run-off road, head-on, and intersection are all essentially passenger vehicle or heavy vehicle related crashes, the vehicle crashes. Once you've got the vulnerable road user involved, the pedestrian, the cyclist, or the motorcyclist, if the cyclist runs off the road, it's not a run-off road, we categorize it as a cyclist crash. Head-on, so the vehicle drifts off out of their lane, hits a motorcyclist, you're categorizing that as a motorcyclist crash. So it's the same way for many of you who have probably done crash investigations or crash reduction studies. You categorize and put codes to crash types. It's very similar to that. So you'll see some dot points in each of the cells of this matrix, and they indicate some of the things that we're using to determine the score. Now, not all of the things. These are just a few thought starters, a few things to get you going. But let's start with exposure, and we'll start with exposure to runoff road crashes. How, and you can see there, it's very clearly, it's just saying AADT. Questions just come in, so I'll just have a look at that. Crashes of turnaround facilities would be analysed in the other column or intersection column. So at turnaround facilities would be an other probably, unless the turnaround facility is sort of embedded in a side road. Sometimes you do a little sort of jug handle in a side road, and then you probably pop it into intersection because there's a side road intersecting there. But if it's just an isolated sort of U-turn turnaround facility, then it would be, yes, another category. So that's a good example there. So we're looking at runoff road crashes, and we're basically saying how many vehicles are exposed to running off the road. And you can see there, it's simple. It's just saying AADT. What's your annual average daily traffic? Okay? And if you know that, you simply go to a scoring reference sheet that is in the Austroad Safe System Assessment Framework. And I've sort of replicated it here. And you see here that they've got a scoring column, and then they've got exposure, likelihood, and severity. It's just got its column, and it's got some information. So say you've got a road and it's got 2,000 vehicles a day. You look at you look here and you say, all right, I'm reading a score of 2. Volume of vehicles that might be involved in a particular crash type are moderate, therefore exposure is moderate. For runoff road, head-on, and other crashes, AADT is between 1,000 and 5,000 vehicles per day. So your AADT is 1,000, between 1,000 and 5,000. Now, for cyclists, pedestrians, or motorcycle crashes, we're talking about between 10 and 50 for a 2 units a day. That's crossing or going through the area. But you can see it's a very sort of clear cut if you know the numbers. If you know your volumes, you just look at the scoring reference sheet and you go, okay. So let's look for a 3. We're going here there between 5,000 and 10,000, a 4 above 10,000 for vehicles a day, a 3 back to a 3 between 50 and 100 for pedestrian, cyclists, and motorcyclists. A 4 is greater than 100. So we're seeing some clear information there. Let's go back here. We'll look at a 1 less than 1,000, less than 10, and a 0. A 0 is essentially saying there are no road users exposed to that crash type. So it might mean there is no intersection there. So there's no side flow, or there are no cyclists, no pedestrians, or no motorcyclists. Now, with that, I suppose I better clarify this 0. If you had like a motorway, for example, and if your motorway says, no cycling on the motorway, you can't have cyclists on the motorway. And, you maybe have like that one Dutch backpacker a year or every couple of years that, arrives on a plane and then rides their bike down the motorway or something, very, very like extremely rare sort of events. I tend to not account for those in the exposure scoring, but I look after those in in some later aspects of a safe system assessment. But like pedestrians, for example, though, on the motorway, I certainly do score them, and usually like a 1 or the like, because of doing that background discussion and information gathering and understanding the amount of sort of vehicles that pull over, people get out, breaking down vehicles, or taxis pulling out at night, pulling up at night, with people getting out and I don't know, being sick or whatever they're doing, and wandering around the road. And there's a sort of surprising amount of pedestrian movement or people out of their vehicle movement on motorways. So I don't. It's enough to warrant me saying yes, there is something there that we can't really ignore. And so you've got to do it not on in theory, you know, or we've banned them, we've told them not to, but you know, what are we predicting? Are they likely to be there? But unless protection, they will be exposed to loss of control crashes. I'm not 100% sure which of those you're referring to, Mike. The pedestrians, perhaps, but absolutely they'll be exposed. Yeah, the pedestrians exposed to that. Yeah, that's right. So you've got to account for them in the exposure. Yeah, so the maintenance crews and workers, I do also treat them slightly differently. I'll account for that in later parts of the safe system assessment. So the matrix is really about the travelling public and people who aren't operating under specific controls and the like. Not to say we absolutely need to consider that. How do they do that operation safely and the like? But for the purposes of the filling out the matrix and scoring that, we quarantine it to the travelling public. Does the assessment make allowances for drunk pedestrians, city centre late at night, wandering up and down motorways? Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Whatever happens or is happening, that you should be factoring this into your matrix scoring. And it does require you to do some investigation to understand the operation, understand what's been happening. Look at, you know, I mean, I'm just using motorway as an example there, but I mean, motorways are good for road safety analysis in the sense that you usually have some exceptional data and CCTV footage and recordings and incidents. You can get a wealth of information if you have to safe system assess one of those. But a lot of the time you're just gathering it from either your knowledge of the area or the discussions you have with the local council or the road controlling authority or other stakeholders. But anyway, so we're trying to put a score between 0 and 4 into the Sullivan matrix. And what did I say? There were 2,000 vehicles a day. So I go, okay, well, it's not a 4, it's not more than 10,000, it's not between 5. Okay, it's a 2 because it's between 1,000 and 5,000. So let's go back here and we just put a 2 into there. Easy as that. Okay, Ash has already jumped into a specific question about head-on crash. Oh, the questions are coming in thick and fast. People are really starting to ponder. This is good. This is good. Let's take these then. Okay, if a median barrier is head-on crash exposure 0 with a median barrier, or do you have to consider the type and potential for vehicles going through the barrier? Well, yes, Ash, you've answered your own question there correctly. You need to make a judgment call on whether you believe that is enough to essentially eliminate head-on crashes, or whether it just makes it very, very rare. So certainly if I had a motorway and it had a test level 3 wire rope safety barrier system in the middle, but I knew there were plenty of very large vehicles running through there, I'd probably have it down at a low, like a 1 or something like that. Very low likelihood score, but the exposure would still be whatever the traffic volumes are. But yeah, if it's a concrete, to some 5 barrier or the like, I'd say, well, that's enough for me to be confident that they're not getting through that. And again, you might have, once every 10 years or something, there might be, or every 20 years or something, there might be some very rare frequent, very, very rare freak event that something happens, but it's not the substantial sort of risk that we're concerned about there. So good question. If you were just assessing an intersection, do you ignore those first 2 columns? And that's a very relevant question for the assessment you're about to do, because you are just going to get basically an intersection. But no, you assess the whole, you assess all of the columns, because remember, as I said, it's how you would code a crash. So if a vehicle approaches an intersection and runs off the road and hits a power pole within the sort of general intersection envelope, that is a run-off road crash. Okay, it happened to be in where an intersection was, but it's a run-off road crash. Likewise, if they've drifted out of their lane or avoided something, and another vehicle is going straight through the intersection, straight through, but they hit each other head on, it's a head-on crash. It happens to be within an intersection envelope. Intersection crashes are those where vehicles are turning or crossing, so there's got to be some sort of turn maneuver or side road friction from that perspective, and that's the intersection crash. Yes, it happens in the intersection envelope, obviously it has to, but that's that. And likewise, the pedestrian struck at an intersection. So yes, you will for your safe system assessment, you will be given an intersection, or maybe you might be a little bit down the road from an intersection as well, but it'll include the intersection. So you're still going to fill out all of these columns. You may, in very rare circumstances, elect not to put the other column in, but most people do because of sideswipe crashes, crashes from vehicles emerging from driveways, things like that. Great question, though, and glad we clarified that. Let's just go down here. The way of looking at it, PEDs and others, how many are there? Yeah, so we'll get to pedestrians and the like for exposure shortly. Okay, so there's quite a complex question there in trying to unpack this, and I've just taken my first step in explaining all of this, and I'm hoping it's going to become clear. So if you're still confused after I get through explaining all of this about, how do you account for different things in exposure and likelihood and severity, I'll get to it. But exposure is generally fairly clear cut as long as you've got traffic volumes or volumes of pedestrians or volume of cyclists or volume of motorcyclists, because you simply just go to your scoring sheet and you have a look at it. The slight little tricks, and remember, we've given you those fact sheets. There's at least 6 fact sheets in the memory stick and on Schoology for things that are a little bit tricky, like exposure at intersections. It's a little bit trickier because it takes into account the side road volumes as well. So this is just AADT on your main road that you're looking at, the dominant leg. This has got to add the 2. You add the 2. X plus Y equals your AADT. Now, for pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists, and this is probably a reflection of a lot of historical what we collect, but the data we get usually for vehicles and vehicle projections and all of that is pretty precise and pretty detailed. And then you say, well, can you give me now the pedestrian counts and the pedestrian projections? And they're like, well, we don't have that. So hopefully we're going to start to see that change, and we take, you know, what you count is what you care about is an old saying, but so let's start to hopefully get more data around pedestrian, cyclists, motorcycles. But if you don't get that from the project, you just got to make a judgment call. So you go, oh, well, I know that area, and I know that there's a reasonable number of pedestrians, and I'm going to go with somewhere between 50 and 100 per day crossing there, but it's not huge. It's not sort of city centre style stuff. So I'm going to go with a 3 for that for score. Ideally, you'd have numbers and you'd be able to do it. So, you'd put a 3 in there. But, you might have a 2. This one might be, you've got that 2,000 vehicles a day on the road, but maybe the side road's got 5,000 vehicles a day. So you add those two up, and it's got, so the side road sounds like it's a major road, and this is a more minor road where we're traveling along looking at. But you add those two up, and you get 7,000. So then you go, okay, there we go, 7,000 between 5 and 10. So, you put a 3 for that one. And then other, you've decided to do side swipe crashes as your main driver of other. And so you've got a 2 because it's on AADT as well. 3 for pedestrians, and you go, oh, cyclists. Well, no, there's hardly any cyclists there. Okay, there's a pack that does every so often they seem to ride the Sunday morning ride through that area, but I'm going to account for them in a different part of this. But we're going to take the sort of usual general cyclists, and we see, a handful a day come through there commuting, but it's hard, so I'm going to put a 1 there. And motorcyclists, we tend to sort of take 1%, 1 to 2% of AADT of other traffic, so we're going to give them a 2 as well. Okay. So you're starting to see how you're establishing exposure scores, and it's somewhat easier. So Mike's, I think, pointing at some information available for traffic volumes. And another question here: if you have less than 10 peds a day and your AADT is greater than 5,000, what would be the exposure? Well, in 2 different columns. You're working in 2 different columns there. So your exposure for pedestrians would be 1 in your question there, because it's less than 10. But your exposure for runoff road, head-on, and intersection being the vehicle one would be greater than 5,000. So it'd be a 3, or if it's greater than 10,000, it'd be a 4. So don't try to get too tricky with this, which is what I feel people are starting to get. But in my PED column shows that we consider AADT an exposure for pedestrians. Okay, I see what you're saying there. It's trying to say like annual average daily traffic of pedestrian numbers. It's badly worded because we tend to use AADT for thinking about vehicles, but you'd actually still call it an AADT of pedestrians because pedestrians are traffic, if that makes sense. But I can see the confusion. I apologise of that. And again, I've taken this straight out of the Austrics. Those are actually a couple of sort of the things that get clarified a bit in the text in Australians, but a lot more in the Victorian government text and in our fact sheets. But just think about pedestrian numbers here. Just think about cyclist numbers here. Just think about motorcyclist numbers here, and think just about vehicle and truck numbers here. And then if you've got something completely out of whack that you want to think about, I don't know, e-scooters or something, you could think about AADT of e-scooters, which would be your number of e-scooters per day, if you wanted to specifically target that. I'll keep moving on, and I'm seeing some longer questions in the Q&A there for a bit later on. And then another question in there around what stage of a project do you do a safe system assessment alongside road safety audits. That I cover in much more detail in our final session, more about process and policy and those sorts of things. So that one I won't answer in this session, but I'll answer in a lot of detail in our next session. Okay, I hope you've sort of got your head around the exposure scoring. Just go back to those numbers, that fact sheet. Then you go to likelihood. Now, likelihood is where it's not so clean cut. It's not as easy. But you'll see there, here's some different things that are, just ideas that help you think about different things that would impact on the likelihood score: speed, geometry, shoulders, barriers, offset to hazards, delineation, lighting, etc., etc., etc. And you're trying to put an hour score between 0 and 4 for the likelihood of crashes. Now, remember, we have accounted for the number in here already. So you can't say that there are lots of vehicles, so the likelihood's higher, because we've taken that into account already. Right? So you've got to bring it back to a relative likelihood based on the infrastructure, not the amount of vehicles going through there, just the infrastructure. So at an individual risk perspective, at an individual likelihood of crashing perspective, and you do it relatively against the rest of New Zealand, basically. I'll explain that a little bit more, but I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to our scoring reference sheet, and I'm going to say, oh, well, I wonder what a 2, what would it take for us to score a 2? Crash likelihood. It is unlikely that a given crash type will occur. Well, that has not given us much information, has it? Let's see whether 3 can help us out a bit more. It is likely that a given crash type will occur. No, it has not helped us much more at all. Let's go with a 4. The likelihood of individual road user error leading to a crash is high given the infrastructure in place, e.g. High approach speeds to a sharp curve, priority movement control, filtering across several lanes of opposing traffic high speed. Okay, so we've got a little bit more for what a 4 is. It's got to have some pretty substantial infrastructure characteristics that are encouraging a crash almost. Let's go back a little bit and see what a 1 is. A 1 is, it is highly unlikely that a given crash type will occur. Yep, okay. A 0 is only minimal chance that a given crash type will occur for an individual road user, given the infrastructure in place. Only extreme driver behavior, substantial vehicle failure could lead to a crash. This might mean, for example, that 2 traffic streams do not cross at grade, or pedestrians do not cross the road. Now, that actually is another one that sort of should actually change this, because that really is under, again, the words are out of Australians, but in the practical realities of it, if you don't have any crossing at grade and you're confident that's going to happen, you account for that in exposure. So let's just move that over there. It's really, to get a 0 in likelihood is very, very, very hard, because you're dealing with humans being humans and falling asleep and texting and being drunk and just being, human. So I don't think I really have ever given a 0 in likelihood. It's, you can have very low likelihoods because everything's set up beautifully. But it's there. The reason I keep talking about relative likelihood is that if you took this on face value, everything would be highly unlikely, because crashes are highly unlikely in that sense, unless you do it in a relative nature. So that means that when you're looking at your intersection, you say, okay, I'm going to take into account all these different factors. It's got, it's straight, bit of road, it's got nice sealed shoulders, great delineation, lighting. It's got all of these wonderful different features, good skid resistance, great camber, great super elevation. Everything's looking great about it. And compared to other lengths of roads or intersections, I'm really happy with everything about it. But I know people are still going to, be falling asleep, and it's not completely eliminating that. So I'm going to maybe give it a 1, because everything's really great, but still there. Just have a look. I see a couple of things popping into the chat again. Could you, so there's a question. It's a good question as well. Could you use the RSA, the road safety order likelihood guidance, 1 per year to 5 years? So they give you some, crash, how often you predict crashes. The answer really is no, because that likelihood in a road safety audit includes exposure and severity, actually, to a degree. And so what we're trying to do is separate these cleanly out. I mean, what you could do is your end products of this should potentially reflect that to a degree, but in their own isolated right. Now, you can't use crash history, and nor do we like to use crash history as people inevitably. So I know the road safety audit one's not crash history, it's your prediction on crashes at that location into the future. But another question I often get asked is, can we just use crash history for likelihood? Like, no, not at all. Because crash history is is a way to determine future risk at an intersection. But because an intersection doesn't have any crashes, does not mean that there's not significant sort of risk there. It just hasn't presented yet in crashes. I mean, we're so, the public and industry are so trained to think that crash history is the only way of identifying road safety risk, and it's got to change. We're so much more sophisticated than that as an industry to be able to understand risk on a road rather than waiting for crashes and crash clusters and the like. So yeah, no, don't use crash history either. I mean, if you happen to have the crash history and there's substantial crash numbers and you can get some intel from that, great, use it, absolutely. And sometimes we do that and we look at that as well. But yeah, as I say, if there's no crashes there, doesn't mean your likelihood score is 0. Your likelihood score still could be 4 if if it had the right infrastructure characteristics. But really, you're not given a huge amount of guidance on this, and this is where it takes some judgment. Road safety auditors tend to sort of really get into this and do it quite well and really justify it. But what you do in a safe system assessment matrix is you actually dot point out all of the factors that are influencing how you've arrived at your score. So it's not like in your end matrix you just go, I'll give it a 2. Now you put lots of information as to how you've decided to arrive at a 2 as your score, or a 1. So let's go back here, and we're saying, okay, we've had a look at this road, and the speeds are 70 kilometers an hour, and the geometry is good, and there are shoulders, and the barriers are set back. And I'll talk about how barriers sit in both columns, because it's a bit confusing, like their presence versus their type and those sorts of things. But you know, there's offset to hazards quite big, and the guidance is good. I'm fairly happy with everything going on here. The 70, and I know people are going to fall asleep and the like. So I'm toying between a 1 and a 2 on this one, and you know, maybe you've got out on site and you've decided, oh, it's actually a long way between, you know, the two townships and major city centres, so they're probably going to be quite fatigued. So I'm going to give it a 2. Right, you've landed on a 2, but you're going to dot point a heap of stuff to justify that. And then you go through and you do that, and maybe you say, oh, there's no separation, so it's just a white line. So, you know, offsets, I'm actually going to make that a 3. Or this, so head-on is an interesting one, because head-on likelihood actually also takes into account AADT. So yes, your exposure's that, but whether they're there, like when you leave your lane, what is the chance that another vehicle will be there actually gets double? You have to recount it. But these are little tiny nuances, and again, there's a fact sheet on that. And your intersection score, you go, oh, well, the intersection's got traffic signals, and it's got you know, mast arms, LEDs, lots of, you know, really clear. Everything's wonderful about that. I'm super happy with it bringing the chance of crashes right down. So we haven't done severity yet, remember, right? So I'm going to give it a 1. And then, you know, you continue to do that. Okay, then you get to pedestrians. Oh, well, it's got pedestrian crossing, it's got refuge islands, it's got good lighting, good sight distance, sight lines are clear, and all of these sorts of things. So I'm going to, but it's, you know, 70 kilometers an hour. I'm going to give it a 2. Cyclists, well, they've got no cycle lanes. They're, you know, trying to mix it with traffic there. And you know, it's all bad. So they get a 4. And motorcyclists tend to get, because a motorcycle crash, you're taking into account intersection crashes, head-on crashes, run off road, and really it's going to be as high as the highest of these. I'm going to go 3 on motorcyclists. Yeah, whatever you've done to unpack this. And now I'm doing this super quickly, but you're actually going to have to in detail dot point out, you know, all of the thinking that you're doing to arrive at these scores. Is crashing into a parked car a kind of run-off road crash? Yeah, you could account for that as a run-off road crash, or you may decide to make it its own other category. And as long as you're clear in your description, that's fine either way. So then we've got some likelihood scores, and now we go to severity. Now let's go back to our scoring reference sheet, and we'll see how we go on severity. So let's look at a 2 for severity. Should a crash occur, it is unlikely that it will result in fatality or serious injury to any road user involved. Kinetic energies are moderate, and the majority of the time are effectively dissipated before reaching the road user. Okay, so unlikely. 3, should a crash occur, it is likely that it will result in fatality or serious injury. Kinetic energies are moderate, but are not effectively dissipated before reaching the road user. 4, should a crash occur, it is highly likely that it will result in a fatality or serious injury. Kinetic energies, so highly likely. Kinetic energies are high enough to cause fatal serious injury and unlikely to be dissipated. And when I say dissipated before reaching the road user, or when they say that, like a barrier, you know, runs energy along it, or there's cushioning. And let's have a look what a 0 is. Should a crash occur, there is only minimal chance it will result in fatal or serious injury in road. This means the kinetic energy transfer is low enough not to cause fatal or serious injury. Excessive energies are effectively dissipated to the road user. Users may refer to safe system critical impact speeds for different crash types while considering impact angles and roadside hazards, barriers, and the like. That's for passenger vehicle ones. So let's go back to our matrix. And now, what were we talking about? We were talking about a 70 km/h road, but I was talking about full lengths of barrier, continuous barrier systems. And let's say those barriers are flexible. And you know, we're at a point there where we've got a full flexible barrier system, offset nicely. And we're thinking in here just about really passenger vehicle crashes, maybe heavy vehicles, depending on your heavy vehicle volumes and the like. And again, you're thinking about barrier type and now you might decide to go a 0 or a 1 there, right? But let's put a 0 in there for now, just because we're thinking 70. So, you know, it's a high speed, but it's a low speed in the scheme of your sort of you know, continuous barrier systems. So everything's quite nice there, but I'll put a 0 there. It's not to say that, you know, severity is going to get a 0 overall, but anyway, so we've got a 0. Now let's look at head on. Well, we don't have any barrier, we don't have any separation there, and we've got the head on, but it's happening at 70 km/h, which is about our threshold speed. But then I go, oh, but there are a small percentage of heavy vehicles, so that, you know, could happen with a heavy vehicle, so I've got to factor that a little bit in. And I go back to my scoring sheet and I have a look and I and ah, and I decide, oh, I'm going to go a 2 for head on, because I'm still worried about some severe injuries and so on. Then intersection. Now remember, we've got signals, and we're really quite excited and happy about how clear they are, how easy to see they are, the mast arms, the skid resistance, the line marking, the advanced warning, everything's looking wonderful, lighting and the like. But that's all been taken into account in likelihood. Now we're just saying, when somebody runs the red light and crashes, how bad is it going to be? We go, oh, it's 70 km/h. We know that the right angle is still possible, and I'm going to go 4 because it's going to be pretty bad in that right angle crash scenario. And you continue to do that. Now, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists obviously more vulnerable, and speed being the big factor there. And so, you know, even though there is pedestrian crossing and the refuge and all of these sorts of things, we're still just going, right, now the crash has happened. A pedestrian is being struck at 70 km/h, it's going to get 4. Cyclists being struck at 70 km/h, it's going to get a 4. Motorcyclists either leaving the road, hitting objects, or like, it's going to get a 4. Now, that's not uncommon to see that across the board for severity for vulnerable road users. And maybe we decide to go a 1 because we're interested in side swipe crashes and you know, you've a great angle and it's not going to be very severe at all. Okay, so now we've got like full numbers across our matrix. So this is wonderful. And we're able to now take these and multiply. So what you do is you multiply exposure by likelihood by severity to give you a crash type product out of 64. So we go 2 times 2 is 4 times 0 is 0. And this one we go 2 times 3 is 6 times 2 is 12. And so on, right? You keep going through and you get then scores. Oh, we can do a few more. So we got 12 for that as well. And then we get 2 for that one. Anyway, I won't do them all. But you'll notice with this one, the runoff road, the severity was 0, which completely made us not care what the exposure or the likelihood is, because anything multiplied by 0 is 0. In the same way, if your exposure is 0, you don't care what the likelihood of crash is or the severity of crash is, because nobody's exposed to that crash. Same with likelihood. If you are absolutely hand on heart sure that nobody's going to crash, you don't care how many are exposed or what the severity is, because there will be no crashes. Now, when you do get a 0 in severity, and if you had high numbers here, you might want to just make some notes on it, but it's not really a safe system issue. It's a traffic operations style issue. And so you do this, you multiply out all of your columns, and then you add your scores at the bottom. And I'll take questions in a second. You add your scores, right? And you get a final score out of 448. And a score of 0 would be perfect alignment with safe system principles. And a score of 448 would be the worst alignment with safe system principles. But the lower the scores, the better. The lower the scores for each crash type, and the lower the scores overall. Okay, so that's the scoring of it. Oh, wow, the questions are, it's all happening. It looks like there's a bit of self-answering in there. When using serious injury in New Zealand, it relates to a person having to stay overnight in hospital. So fatal and serious injury category there, therefore is very wide. Yes, yeah. So you need to make a bit of judgment on that yourself. But yes, I mean, it's the same. You take whatever serious injury categorization you have. I mean, your New Zealand road safety strategy's aim is to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes as defined in New Zealand. So that's what your safe system assessments are sort of calibrating. But you can kind of you make a bit of judgment calls around some of this stuff. Use those crash graphs and those colored graphs and those numbering things to help you calibrate your scoring. I've got a question here. Do you account for reduction in speed as someone brakes prior to a crash? Well, no. Yes and no. I mean, really, no, you don't, because that's going to happen sometimes, but we are interested in those extreme events. But what you're probably going to account for that a little bit in is your likelihood. So you're still dealing with the higher end crash severity. The likelihood of that higher end crash severity happening may be lessened a bit if you think that there'll be lots of people braking beforehand. So they'll be down in a lower severity crash category. But if you have physical infrastructure there and they're braking to approach the physical infrastructure, a roundabout, raised platform, these sorts of things, then your severities will be down. Then there's some discussion about exact definition of serious injury. I'll let you work that out. It's slightly different for every jurisdiction I work in, so I don't need to get into that one. Okay. It's like I can keep going. You can continue to chat about that. I'm going to show you some examples of real safe system assessments shortly, because it's going to be easier once you see a real example rather than sort of the theory of it. And then, of course, the best way to learn is you go out and do one, and you find you'll work it all out. And then if not, you'll get in contact and we'll chat through different bits. So here is like a very sort of brief, light safe system assessment. And you can see there that the matrix, don't worry about reading the words. I'll take you through another one shortly. But you can see there that there's some information, some dot points within each of these cells justifying the scores that they've got to. So it's not just like a big number. And you'll see that these are factors that increase this score and factors that decrease this score. And you put that in for each of them. Factors that increase, factors that decrease. Now you will see there that this this matrix has gone to a 0.5. And we don't encourage people to go to 0.5s, but if you absolutely feel you must, you can go to a 0.5. You can't go any more precise than that. And that's one thing that played out. We had a lot of discussion in the development of the Austroads document, or I was involved in parts of those discussions, but I said that if we put numbers to this, it's going to get used by technical people. They're just going to run it off the cliff in terms of the use of the numbers. And in its early stages, that's what we discovered. People coming in with likelihood scores to 3 decimal places. And you're like, oh, that's, this is a broad brush tool, and it's not intended to be that precise. And so it was sort of decided, let's just stick to the 0.5s. Well, let's work through one. Okay, here's an intersection. And it's got a give way control, so passive control. You can see there it's sort of on a curve, it's downhill. It's got some power poles there. Got a bit of a footpath over there. There you go. It's got some lighting. It's got a few other features. So you're sort of looking at all this. It's got a big sort of creek thing here nearby. And they've come forward with a plan to turn it into a roundabout. They've also got another option to do a modified T with traffic signals. So it's signalized, and what I call a modified T, so yeah, or a conventional T intersection with traffic signals. And so what you do to do a safe system assessment of those 3 options is the first thing you do is you fill out a matrix for the existing conditions. So you put the designs aside, you just go out and you look at what are all the factors that are going to increase or decrease the likelihood of runoff road crashes, the severity of runoff road crashes. So you're looking at likelihood, you're looking at sealed shoulders, guideposts, lighting, surface, fact it's downhill, speeds, then the severity, what are the speeds, what are they going to hit, and the like. And you dot point lots of information in here and here, and you come out with your scores, your exposures, because you've got your traffic volumes, you score it all out, you get a final score for the existing conditions. You've got a nice complete matrix for your existing conditions. Then you copy that whole matrix, that whole table, and you paste it. And then you start to manipulate based on the design. You pick the first design. So say you take the roundabout, first design. And now you start to go, well, okay, now they've got rid of this factor, so you cross that out, Oh, but this has added these things. Got rid of that. That's not an issue anymore. Oh, it's added these ones. And you go through, you go, oh, that's changed now, but I've added that. So you're starting to change it. And you actually do this in your matrix. You use the cross out feature, strike through feature in Word, and then you change the color of new things that get added. You change the color of the numbers. You've changed a number. And then you do it for each. So then you go and you get, so you've done the roundabout, then you go and get the existing conditions matrix again, copy it, paste it, and manipulate it for your next option. And then you do it for your next option. And then you get these series of matrices for all the different options. And you then get sort of an overarching score comparison out of 448. Remember that. So this is your end scores. And you can see for this one, this example, we had a existing conditions score of 118.5, and a roundabout drops it to a 90. A modified T with signals, a 99, and a T intersection to 105. So without anything else, I can say, if we can put this into a graph if we want. It's pretty easy. I can say immediately that the roundabout at that location, as it was designed, has best alignment with safe system principles. Then the modified T with signals, and then the conventional T with signals is. But even the conventional T with signals has better alignment with safe system principles than the existing conditions. But the other thing I can say from that immediately is that nothing they're presenting has perfect alignment with safe system principles. So there's more that can be done for each of them. And that's what you do in a safe system assessment. You provide them advice on how to bring each of those to better alignment with safe system principles. But the output people are really looking for is a lot of sort of executive level people or approvers are looking for, or business cases would expect to see, is this sort of graph that comes out of it. And that's the red being the existing conditions, and the, each of the colors, the orange being the roundabout design, the blue being the modified T, the gray being the conventional T. And so you can immediately see where you're getting your benefits. The lower the bar, the better. And, where things aren't going as well as planned. So take, for example, the roundabout. I know it's got the best alignment with safe system principles, but immediately I'm going, well, it'll make it worse for cyclists. So we might have a look at that. Or, gee, I wonder what this other is, and you can delve in and find out what's going on there. So you can see immediately you get this sort of nice, clean output that helps you identify risk. It's got numbers to it. It looks very sort of, I don't know, I say it's starting to get us into the game to be able to combat traffic modeling in terms of the, people put down that SIDRA report or that traffic modeling report, and it's big and juicy and got lots of numbers and graphs and this tables and the like, and nobody tends to argue with it. But we put down our road safety advice, and they go, "Oh, no, no, I think it'll be good," and they're sort of basing it off their judgment. And anyway, so I think this is a bit of a step into us being able to combat that in a more sort of systematic way. Right. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes break and then we'll go into a few things to finalize, and then I'll give you your assignment. But I will pause there and see if anybody's got any questions. All right. Well, let's take 2-minute break. Have a stretch, fill up your water. If you've got any questions, type them in now. Otherwise, we'll keep going as soon as we're back into it. If you're a little bit confused at this stage, don't worry too much, because I'm going to show you more. I'm going to give you examples of pre-work safe system assessments. You're going to do an assignment to practice it. You'll get there. Okay, we'll get back into it in a second. All right, let's keep going. So we've seen an output look something like this. We've got some scores, but as I mentioned, if we go back here, each one of those options, there's more that can be done. It can be better. We can get lower scores. And so we start to make some recommendations, some ideas for them to consider in improving the alignment with safe system principles. And each idea that we put forward, we categorize as either a primary treatment or a supporting treatment. Now, we don't recommend non-safe system treatments because, you know, that's going to make things worse, but that's in there for terminology. What is a non-safe system treatment? You might use that as a terminology at some point. But what we want to do is say, okay, is what we're suggesting road planning, design, and management considerations that virtually eliminate the potential for fatal serious injury crashes occurring with the foreseeable crash types? Or is it supporting? And that's things that we know are going to improve the overall level of safety associated with the foreseeable crash type, but are not expected to virtually eliminate the potential for a fatal serious injury crash occurring. And also, this is a little clause that hardly ever really gets used, but it doesn't change the ability for a primary treatment to be implemented in the future. But basically, the little sort of rules of thumb I use, to be a primary treatment, you're really going to have to get those speeds, angles, or you're going to have to manage the energy. So it could be the continuous barrier system, but it could be raised pedestrian crossings, could be roundabouts for intersection crashes with passenger vehicles. Everything's all designed nicely, but you're noticing there that all of those things are getting the energy, the speeds, managing that. If you're not doing that and you're trying to rely on the human operating perfectly, then we would call it a supporting treatment if it's going to improve things. So all of your line marking signs, sealed shoulders, lighting, you name it, from those sorts of things, where they're certainly good road safety techniques, audio tactile, edge line, but they're not going to virtually eliminate the crash, the fatal and serious injuries. They're going to reduce the likelihood of it. So you make a whole lot of recommendations on their design and you categorize them so they know which are the big ticket items and which are good to do, but they're supporting. There's another aspect to a safe system assessment that is done, and you can decide where you do this along your journey, but you go through and you answer these qualitative questions. So these ones you aren't putting scores to. And you remember there were a few things in the matrix that I said, oh, I'll deal with that later, like in my assessment. And this is where we're dealing with these things. So these are the questions straight out of Austroads, and you go through and in a full safe system assessment, you answer each of these. Now, I'll admit, a lot of these you're probably going to scratch your head and you go, it's not really applicable, or I don't have anything to add here. And that's okay. The idea is that at least you're thinking about it, putting it into the context of your project. Are road users likely to be alert and compliant, and are there factors that might influence this? What are the expected compliance and enforcement levels? Alcohol, drugs, speed, road rules, driving hours. What's the likelihood of driver fatigue? Now, some of these may influence and alter your scoring of the matrix a little bit. Can enforcement be conducted safely? Are there special road users, so entertainment precinct, elderly, on-road motorcycle, on-road activities or motorcycle routes or the like? Environmental factors, risk-taking behaviours. These are things you're just dot pointing thoughts or things that you've noticed or you've discussed with stakeholders or the like, and putting your notes down. Example of things that have played out, like enforcement is an interesting one. We did a safe system assessment on a big, like $101 million road duplication project, and they had the design, or had a few designs, but we talked to the local highway patrol of the area and said, they have a big project planned, and just wondering, will you be able to do enforcement on this, or will you, or what's your enforcement regime? And they said, we'd love to be able to do enforcement in that area. We've never really been able to do it because of this reason and that reason. And if you could build an area that we could park the booze bus and number plate recognition vehicle up the road, and then so that information was fed back to the project team within the safe system assessment, and some suggestions on areas they could have a look at, and they worked a bit more with the police in the design, and they were able to utilize an old stack site and design it and configure it so it was a place that the booze bus could go. Up the road was an area for the number plate recognition vehicle, and they were able to conduct enforcement there in a very safe manner, off the road, and it's just wonderful all round. So you can see that sort of question generates some broader thinking than just the exact placement of barrier or type of end terminal or those sorts of physical treatments that we tend to focus on in some of these big infrastructure projects. Some discussion and thinking about the vehicles. What is your level of alignment with the ideals of safer vehicles? That is a very broad, open-ended question, and generally more relevant when you're doing a whole community or a mine site or the like. It's a bit hard to do in your individual infrastructure projects. You sort of scratch your head a little bit about it. Other factors that might attract a large number of unsafe vehicles, percentage of heavy vehicles too high for the proposed design. Is it being used by recreational motorcyclists? Are there resources to detect non-roadworthy, unregistered vehicles and remove them from the network? Can enforcement be conducted safely of those? The vehicle compliance? Has vehicle breakdown been catered for? And post-crash care. So are there issues that might influence safe and efficient post-crash care in the event of severe injury? Do emergency and medical services operate as efficiently as possible? So that was an interesting one. It's played out a number of different assessments and different things. And I know in New Zealand, there's been some different road safety work around helicopter landing areas for some of those areas that are really hard to access by road, and there weren't great spots for the helicopters to land. And that sort of thinking is what you're doing. Maybe even thinking about mobile phone reception in areas and those sorts of features. So pretty broad thinking. Are road users and emergency response teams protected during a crash event? That's usually a motorway style one, as some others are. Are drivers provided the correct information to address travel speeds on the approach to and adjacent to an incident? That's another motorway one. Usually it's mainly the scenarios where it plays out. Is there reliable information via radio VMS? Is there provision for safety systems based on modern information, communication technologies, cooperative ITS, and those sorts of things. That's kind of your question, I think, that's going to build over time in terms of how we answer it and what we put in there around vehicles of the future, roads that cars can read, style thinking, and designing for automated or highly automated vehicles and those sorts of things. But they're in there to just prompt your thinking. Again, I say you're not scoring these, you're just putting dot points, sentences, ideas, thoughts, and they may feed into recommendations for the project, or they may slightly tweak your scoring. So that's they're the final sort of aspects of the assessment. The questions come in, what if we cannot improve the score on the proposed schemes? Well, I think you will be able to. I mean, it's fairly easy to always do that. The reason it's fairly easy to always do that is because you're not heavily constrained by some of the things that they are heavily constrained by. Yes, certainly you're trying to do the best job you can in helping them do things that are practical, but you can you'll pretty much always be able to identify from your matrix where scores are going up, and then identify things that could be done to bring that down. Now, inevitably, they will come with different challenges. Sometimes they'll come with more cost. Sometimes they'll come with less cost as well. But sometimes it's cost. Sometimes it's maybe more in land, which is going to be cost as well, or the like. Sometimes it changes a road user's experience in one way or another. But you can put these out there and they can respond and say, well, we can't do that for these reasons. But I'm fairly confident you'll be able to come up with ideas. There's lots and lots of ideas that you'll be able to find. So let's have a quick look here. We have a legal moral duty to protect road workers, but the system doesn't seem to take them into account. Yeah, so again, I say that this tool is predominantly, I mean, it is very much a tool to try to reduce the sort of 400 people killed on New Zealand roads a year and the 4,000 plus seriously injured per year. I mean, that's a massive source of trauma. And there's absolutely hugely important to ensure that we protect the road workers and make sure things are sort of set up for them. But it's not the particular focus of this assessment methodology. A safety and design workshop and check is a lot more, I mean, that's what its focus is. Can it be maintained safely? Can it be? Now, we do tend to look into that a bit as part of this, but yeah, it's not the central focus. It's the travelling public. Yeah, so Nick's popped that in there as well, that the safety and design process. And you remember that sort of Venn diagram I put up there at the start, was talking about that sort of overlap between those. So you do look into it a bit. Right, let me talk to you a little bit here about a report, a safe system assessment report. Then I'm going to show you one, and then I'm going to tell you what you've got to do in our last little bit of time. So a safe system assessment report actually mirrors somewhat a road safety audit report, just so we're all comfortable, which shows different things. You say what type of assessment you're doing. I haven't even talked to you about a full or a rapid safe system assessment and being types. Do that next session. Members, who was in your safe system assessment team? What meetings did you have? When did you inspect sites and those sort of things? A bit about the process so people who aren't familiar with it know what's going on. Background on the project and the context of the project, and you can get those from the prompt sheets. Then you do your matrix with scores and commentary on factors that are, changing the score for the existing conditions and the design options. Other safe system components being those qualitative questions we've just gone through, and then suggested treatments, and then you categorize those treatments. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to just show you a worked one that I was just happen to be looking at the moment, and then I'll tell you what you're going to be doing. Where was it? Oh yes, this one. Okay, we'll just flick through this very quickly, just so you see sort of what a completed product will look like. So you got an executive summary. Don't need to worry about that too much. But this is good. Immediately you're seeing sort of overarching results, and you can see there their existing conditions score, and you can see the design option scores. So you can see their intersection scores gone up. So that's a worry. And then it's been sort of segmented up into different things. There's the intersection score that's significantly gone up, which is a worry. I dare say they're ripping a roundabout out there and putting in a set of traffic signals. And then so you're getting, a bit of background information, bit of info about the site. That's straight out of Austroads, your scoring reference sheet, and some explanation of how things have arrived at. There's a bit in there, and then ideas for consideration. You can see here primary treatments. They've got ideas for primary treatment changes. You see the project response is blank. You leave that. That's for them, the project team, to respond to. And supporting treatments. So there's some things that are supporting. Now this one's actually slightly different. They put the matrices as an appendix, which often you put it into the report. But you can see existing conditions. Look, lots of dot points, factors that increase and factors that decrease. So you can see lots of dot points there. It's not just a word or two. They're fleshing it out to explain how have they arrived at this 3. It wasn't just I'll just give it a 3. No, they've analysed, they've looked at, they've made, considerations of all of this stuff. And then they've got to their final scores. And then I've done, okay, design option, and crossed out all of these things. And then there's something, there you go, that street lighting may still be inadequate. There's nothing that at this stage is saying that the street lighting is going to be improved. And they've got some new things in red. And then they've changed the scores down to a 1. So I've got a half as well. So you can see there how it sort of plays out, and then a changed score. So you can see there's a good bit of detail in those. It's not just a number. Question that's come in there. Does the matrix apply to the whole route, which might have multiple sections, or does intersectional along the route have individually assessed? Yeah, there is a fact sheet we've given you on exactly how to do that, because and summarize it very quickly. You need to break it into homogeneous sections. So if you have multiple intersections that are the same, or lengths of road that are the same, you can do 1. But if you have a substantial change in speed or lane widths or roadside or those sorts of things, you need to do its own matrix. And if you have a different intersection form, you need to do another one. But have a look at the particular fact sheet that takes you through exactly that. Where do we do this process, revise and solution? But also where designs have been done by others and we are evaluating. I'm not 100% sure I follow that, but yeah, you certainly tend to utilize this as a way to assess, to quantify, is this project improving things or not, and then make suggestions to improve it, be it, on others' designs usually done on others' designs. I want to show you a couple of other things here. I'm going to tell you what you've got to do as your assignment. I'm going to go into Moodle, yeah. Okay. Let's go to Moodle. So this might look slightly different in yours because I'm in the editor end, I think. But you're going to go down here. So hopefully you'll be comfortable with all this. Module 3. So we've just completed module 4. So you're going to have a quiz to do at the end of this one. But the quiz, I think, is just, actually, there may be some questions. No, there are proper quiz questions in there. Module 5 is your assignment. So we don't actually have a webinar for this one. It's just you doing your assignment. And the first thing that's in there is this safe work method statement. And that's basically there to say you're going to be safe when you go to site. You're not going to go out there intoxicated. You're going to park safely. You're going to, do all those proper things to be safe. I'll give you a little bit more information about that shortly, but you're going to wear your high-vis vest. And then this is a safe work method statement agreement, basically to say, yep, had a look at that, and I, yes, won't go out there intoxicated. I'll wear my vest, I'll behave myself, and I'll try to ensure that I'm safe. Now, we've assessed all your sites to ensure that they can be done safely. So then you click in here, and you're going to see a whole lot of PDFs. Now, one of those PDFs will have your name next to it. And there might be a couple of you with the same one. And so we'll find that. But you've also got in here a Word document template and an Excel template. The Word document template, we click on that. That up. Slide that over from the other screen. Here we go. So hopefully you're seeing that. You should be seeing that now. Actually, just going to stop sharing and reshare just to make sure you are seeing that, because it's pretty important you are seeing that. You'll see here you've got a Word document template, and it's got this stamp on it that says complete only the highlighted sections only the highlighted things is what we want you to do. This is a Victorian government template, freely available to everybody to take, to rebrand, to do whatever you want with. So feel free to use it. I'm not going to get you to waste time writing an executive summary or a table of contents or any of this stuff. I just want assurance that you understand the process. So you're going to put your name in, insert your name. Now, if there's another person on your site and you want to work with another person, we're okay with that. But if you do that, you have to put both people's names on both assessments. That makes sense? So if I see that, there's two that are the same, they better both have both names on there as the assessment team. And you both upload your own one, but have to have those joining names so I can go, yep, okay, that's the same. Don't fill out any of the background info or the like. So you're not going to have But you do put a little bit of info about the proposed work. So you've had a look at the PDF, you've discovered what they're going to do. Maybe put a snip of that in here, that'd be nice. Then you have an assessment summary, which you'll write at the end after you've completed it, you've done your scoring. Existing condition score, you only have one design option. So you're going to have a design option score. You're going to put your own Excel graph there, and we've given you this Excel graph generator just to, again, try and make your life a little bit easier. And then you've got an existing conditions matrix. So you're going to write in there, you know, traffic volume was this, so we've given it a 3. Head on was this, so we've given it a, you know, traffic volume head on's this, we've given it a score here. Factors that increase the likelihood, and you know, you're going to dot point lots of factors in there, lots of factors in decreasing the likelihood, and put a score. And you're going to fill all of this out for your existing conditions. Once you're happy with that, you copy it, you're going to paste it, and you're going to create one for your design option. And then you're going to fill out your primary treatments. So you're going to say, for their design, right? These are extra things they could change, they could improve, they could alter to make it even better. And you know, you might say, well, they could do raised pedestrian crossings around the roundabout to you know, aid pedestrian crossing and slow vehicles at that crossing point. You don't fill out a project response, you just leave that blank. You do that for primary, you do that for supporting. And the only site photo we want is some sort of selfie, or set up a camera so it takes a photo of you out there to prove you went to the site and you looked at it. You have to go to the site. It's such an important part of a safe system assessment and getting for a feel for the site, how it's used, what your road users are present, how the design is going to tie in with the existing, you know, just things you can't see from street view or the like. So just one photo to prove that you went out there wearing your high-vis vest. So that's what you're going to fill out, and that's what you're going to submit. Stop sharing that, and I'm going to take questions again very shortly, but I'm just going to do one more thing here. I'm just going to reinforce some of these safety points. Wear your high-vis vest while you're out there. Stay off the road. You don't need to be, you know, putting your head down to look at the crossfall of the road, or measuring lane widths or these sorts of things. You're gathering that higher level. How does it function and the like? Don't be a hazard to others. So don't make people walk onto the road to get around you, or park in an area that makes cyclists go into dangerous spots, or park away. And you can do this very safely. You can park away from the intersection. You can walk, there's areas you can safely observe, see what's happening. Go through the safe work method statement. And of course, also if the residents come out to find out what's going on and what's being planned, just say you're on a training exercise. You know, some of the plans are real plans. Some of them have been fabricated to fit within your local area to ensure that that's happening, but we don't certainly want the residents thinking thinking things are going to be happening. So no need to do the community consultation at this stage. And I'm just going to show the spreadsheet, and then I'll get to the questions. So just to make your life a little bit easier, you saw there was a spreadsheet in there, and this is just a little, like, I mean, you can whip this up in no time in Excel yourself if you want, but it's just something that'll generate the graphs for you. So you just put the scores in. So you still have to fill out your matrix with all your details in your Word document, but you can just sort of quickly get a graph. And there you go. See, it'll produce your graph for you. And then you can either just use your snipping tool or copy that. So you snip that out like that if you wanted, or you can just click on it and copy it and paste it as an image or paste it into the Word document. Just trying to save you time, basically. So you do that for existing conditions and design. And it'll draw it for you. Okay, so hopefully you understand what's going on. Let's just answer some questions, and then I'll just dive back into Moodle shortly and check that everybody's got what they need. So Mike's made a comment there for everybody. Check if you need a traffic management plan for the site visit with the Road Controlling Authority. Yeah, I'll leave that to you to work out. I mean, most of our sites have been very carefully selected to be very, very low risk or done low risk, and the local areas or shopping areas where you can park away, you can just wander on the footpath and be very, very safe, but you may have some local requirements to have a think about. I'll let you sort of manage that within your organizational realms. Okay, so some of us are in lockdown and can't visit sites allocated to us for another week or so. The timing on this is that you do have at least 2 weeks to do this. I mean, the preference would be that you get started fairly quickly, because our session in a week's time is where I talk about general policy and processes and when it's best to do a safe system assessments and all of that sort of stuff. But it's also, there's quite a bit of time allocated to answer your questions, because hopefully you've got going and you go, oh, okay, this is all making sense except for this bit. I've got no idea what is meant by this bit, or I can't understand it, or I've got this unique scenario in the site that they've given where it's got these features and I don't know where to account for that. And it's best if we talk that out as a group so everybody can learn from that. Yes, so if you can start by having a look at the design you're given, starting to score things up and look at things, maybe do some street view stuff initially, and then maybe get your site visit done later down the track, that's fine. I don't know the specifics of lockdown. I know certainly in Victoria, we ran the course during different lockdowns. Some people were able to, because they were close enough, the sites were close enough to their house that they, on their sort of exercise, were able to go out and have a look at it. But I don't know, again, whether that's what the specifics of your rules around lockdown and how rigorous things are. And I know it's a little rare for you to be in lockdown, but I'm in, I think, the 230th day of lockdown in the last 2 years at the moment. So we've worked out our systems and processes and practices pretty well. But yeah, you're going to have to be flexible. Now, in the end, right, if the world is the world and it says you can't do your site visit, then you won't be able to do the site visit, and we will be able to adapt and get you to, all we want you to do is prove that you understand the process and you're thinking like a safe system assessor, and you're presenting forward scoring and recommendations that are consistent with what we expect at a benchmark level. And we can do that using just desktop resources, but it's not, you don't get the full rich experience that we want. So our preference is absolutely for you to get out on site. But as I say, if COVID takes over and just won't let that happen, we will make sure we smooth it through. But keep in contact if that gets to that point. Okay. Just going to jump back into Moodle, I think. Yeah, so you're going to find your site, and I don't know, I'll just pick a random one. Here we go. This is a couple of you. You've got Grant and Park Street, and you're going to click on that. It's going to download it, and let's hope this is one that, yeah, this is good. Okay, so here you go. You got a nice low-risk environment to be able to inspect. You can park safely down around here somewhere. You can walk up here, have a look around. Maybe you could go to the park. And you can see there that they've got a intersection that they're proposing a roundabout at. And so you've even been given some traffic volumes here, right? Now, you can see there in red that these have been provided for training purposes. They may not be, and you might actually go, I know this street. I've done 5 traffic studies on this street over my career, and I know that those numbers are wrong. Well, they've been generated, so you've got, if somebody has no idea, they've got something to go to. You've got some traffic volumes to work with. Use those. Motorcyclists unknown. We'll use 1% of AADT. You can see the scope of it. So what you're going to do is you're going to do an existing conditions matrix. What is the base? Then you're going to score the roundabout. And then the recommendations that you're going to make for improvement are on this roundabout design. Okay? This is one thing that it's surprising how many people seem to get confused about this. But they're planning to build a roundabout there. You're telling them either, you're actually going to get better alignment with safe system principles if you do some other intersection treatment, or if you're doing the roundabout, maybe you want to do speed cushions on the approach. Maybe you need to provide pedestrian crossing points. Maybe the lighting needs to be improved. Maybe, a whole lot of things that you could potentially think about to make this a better treatment. You don't rescore your options. Like, you're going to tell them all these ideas. You don't rescore that. In a real safe system assessment, they may come back to you and they go, thanks for all your ideas. We did, we're going to do this one, this one, this one, and this one, but we can't do these other 6. But with those ones, can you tell us what the new safe system assessment score would be? Then you'd have to produce a whole new matrix again of this design with all these extra features. But that's not part of the assignment. Now, let me run through here my sort of common top 10 things that I take marks off people for when I'm marking their safe system assessments. So this is to try to help you as much as possible. And these ones are so common that I've got them pre-written to put into the marking. I'm like, yep. So the first one is that the matrix is just very light on detail. They've put a word or 2 in each cell. It haven't got enough detail in there to really justify how they landed on a 3 or a 2. It's just too light. There's a little minor one. You don't lose big marks for this, but if you report layouts all over the place and can't, it's bad, hard to follow and read, it's not a big factor in the scheme of things. Surprisingly often that people will take the existing conditions matrix, they'll paste it, they'll change it, but they don't strike through or change the color of new text. So as somebody reading it, you can't tell what the difference is. Like, you're looking at the cell, you have to read that cell and you have to read this one again and go, okay, hang on, I can't, what's the difference here? No, you've got to try and make it really clear. And as I say, the convention is to cross out, strike through, or change the color to new things that have been happening. People tend to be pretty good with exposure when they've actually got the matrix and the scoring and you've got your traffic volumes. Again, occasionally we get likelihood things popping into severity and vice versa. So I think this group's pretty pretty good at that. You're better than a lot of groups I've had from seeing your assignment 2s. If you're going to make a score less than 4 or the like, there should be factors that reduce. Like, you can't say no factors. Sorry, let me explain. That's probably easier to explain with an example. Have I got an example available? No, I don't. So what am I trying to say? So you've got to score, if there are no factors that increase your score, you would expect the score to be 0. If there are no factors that decrease your score, you'd expect the score to be 4. So if you're not going to go with one end of those extremes, you can't really put none in as factors that increase or factors that decrease. What else have I got here? Little tips. Oh, the treatments. I mean, the treatments, yes, you want to keep them generally within what is practical, but you can push, and we want you to push. Like, it's not your responsibility as an assessor to do all of the work to determine whether or not it is something that the project can or can't do. You go, that's going to improve safety. That's going to improve alignment with safe system principles. Yeah, it comes with some other challenges, but I'm going to put it in there, and it's up to them to respond and say we can't do it. But you don't want to lose something. They go, actually, yeah, we can do that, and you want to. So you want to put those in there. Leave that project response blank. So don't pretend you're the project team and answer these things. The recommendations are to improve their design, right? You're not analyzing, which aspects of the design have improved things or are primary or not. No, you go, right, I've analyzed the existing conditions, I've analyzed their design. Now I'm saying, here are some ideas to improve your design to make it even better. I think they're sort of the main ones people seem to struggle with. If exposure is 0, do you still fill out likelihood and severity, or leave it blank as you know it's going to be 0? Yeah, I mean, you can just leave it blank and just go, just write exposure 0. So you put a 0 for exposure, and then in the likelihood one you could just write, NA, because exposure 0. Now, that being said, it's not often that you get exposure at 0. So I wouldn't expect a lot of that to be happening, but you might have a scenario where that you've decided exposure is 0. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, I suppose. Now there's a longer question in there from Mike in the Q&A, which I'll have a read of, and I might get back to you on, or try and provide you some examples. And I'll probably talk next session about the subjectivity and how we are getting varied scores between assessors around New Zealand. And that's completely to be expected. We're producing some more things to try to get more consistency in scoring. But at the moment, you do have very varied scores. And so one group will score something differently to another, like the same intersection, same design, you'll get different scores for it. Now, actually, the way the Safe System Assessment framework was set up, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's all about the relative scores between your existing condition score and your new score. So it's important to have that consistency of scoring team. But this is remember, this is a risk assessment methodology, and it's the way that we present it with numbers that gets people all hot and bothered. I mean, if this was just a risk assessment where we were risk grading things as, low, medium, high, intolerable, extreme, or whatever it is, and one group said it was medium risk and the other group said it was high risk, they'd be going, oh, why did you think it was that? And they go, that's why we've landed on that. We don't get as concerned, but as soon as we seem to put numbers to this, everybody goes a bit crazy about it. And that was, again, numbers have some great advantages, but they have some downsides, and that's probably one of them. As I say, we're trying to get a bit more consistency, and we'll be providing information to past participants of the course when we release stuff to try to get that consistency. And Austroads has got it slated for some more work, and Waka Kotahi is probably going to be doing some work on that. So that people will be continuing to work on this, but don't get too annoyed if there's slight variances. The aim is to give indication of where risk lies and ways that we can improve scores. Any other questions? So in Moodle, you'll be able to see the due date on this, and I'm trying to look for it now. 30th of September is the absolute due date for your thing. So you've got 2 weeks on that. So hopefully you'll be able to get out and look at the site within that time. You can do a lot of work at the desktop beforehand, and if coronavirus makes it so we can't get out there, so be it. But I think we hopefully will be able to get out there one way or another. Well, thank you very much. And of course, as you start to look into this, if you're struggling, if you really can't understand it, or you've got challenges, get in contact. Happy to have a one-on-one chat with you, or you can shoot me an email, or we can have a phone call, a Zoom, or whatever, and we'll get you through it. There is in Moodle, in the resources section, actually in my last minute, I'll take you to this because I think it's probably important and helpful. In the resource section in Moodle, reference documents and resources. So there are the fact sheets you can use, but in this reference documents, you'll see the Safe System Assessment Framework is in there. You've got the templates again, which will help you, but the Safe System Assessment Framework is in there. And if I open that up, hopefully you can see that as well. This is really helpful stuff down here around page 15 and on, because they actually give you treatments and their categorization in terms of primary and supporting treatments, and also tell you if they influence severity, likelihood, and exposure. So you've got some help in that sense. So have a flick through that document as well. All right, it's 10 o'clock. You've probably got other meetings and lots of work to do, so I better leave you to it, but keep in contact. Thank you.